circumstances in which this gerrymander was enacted. It was enacted in the summer of 2011. There's been quite a bit written about how, about how the Republicans went around drafting this gerrymander, and we can talk more about it in Q&A if you want, but basically they hired some lawyers from the leading big Republican law firm in the state, Michael Best and Friedrich, located in Madison, to be in charge of the drafting of the new redistricting. They seconded some key legislative aides for Republican legislative leaders to the law firm to be temporary employees of the law firm to actually do the work. They put them in a locked room. Those of you who know the square in Madison, it was in the big glass bank building that's on the square, U.S. Bank. It was called the map room. It was locked. You had to have permission to go in, access. Basically, the only people who got in there, not just any legislator, could go in and look at it. You had to be a legislative leader. You had to be one of the lawyers, one of the key staff people who basically worked in there, or a couple consultants that they hired. They drafted and drafted and drafted and drafted till they crafted a map using packing and cracking that produced as large a Republican majority as they could figure out how to do, drawing the lines, consistent with their idea that the Republican majority had to be safe, that the cracked districts wouldn't be 52-48, they would be 55-45, many of them are 60-40. They didn't want to take chances in a wave election. When they got that done, they brought in just the existing Republican members of the legislature to look at their new district, but they couldn't see the whole map. They could just see their own new district and make any comments they wanted about it, and they might fiddle with a line here or there. Even the individual members of the Republican majority who were not in the leadership were not allowed to comment on the general policy reflected by this. They're just their own district. When that was all done, then they had revealed it in public as a bill and passed it 8 days later. There was one public hearing about 3 days after it was introduced. And that was all in August 2011. Now, because of the haste to get it enacted, and there were several reasons for the haste, and I'm not privy to all the discussions that go on in the Republican councils, so I don't know if I know them all. But it was at the time when there was a lot of activity about recall elections, and there was some concern that the Republicans would eventually lose control of the state Senate, which they did briefly in the summer of 2012 because of the recall elections. So they wanted to be sure to get this enacted before that happened. But one of the consequences which affected Howard here and other communities in the state was this. The tradition in Wisconsin redistricts, or any state redistricts, every 10 years after each census. In fact, that's a U.S. constitutional requirement. The tradition had been that the legislature would wait until the local governments had redrawn their local voting districts, or we used to call them precincts. I think they're called voting districts now, or some places they're called wards. But in any event, they're the lowest unit in the election hierarchy. And they get redrawn after each census as well to reflect population variances. And tradition was to wait until they had done that, and then the legislature would build assembly districts off of that, because it's a provision in the Wisconsin Constitution that no voting district can be put into two separate assembly districts. It has to lie entirely in one assembly district. It's in the Wisconsin Constitution. Well, they didn't want to wait till the local governments got done. So they just drafted anyhow, not knowing what the new voting districts would be like, And then because of the Wisconsin Constitution, they passed a statute directing all the local governments when they got around to redrawing their voting districts to be sure that none of the new voting districts crossed any assembly district line as just drafted. So you had, the local governments lost their ability to control a little bit assembly district drafting. In other words, the draftsmen had greater flexibility. They could be more precise in their drawing of lines than they could be if they had to include a voting district all in one assembly district.